Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from today. Thanks for joining day 2 of Stratosphere. My name is Eric Kimberling. For those of you that haven't joined one of our sessions in the past, I know we had a lot of registrations just yesterday after we finished our sessions. We had a couple dozen people register as first-time participants. So I welcomed all the new people to the conference here this week, and certainly welcome everyone back that was here yesterday. Real quick before we get started, a couple logistical things. I have the agenda in front of you of what we'll cover today. The first thing we'll cover is a session that I'll lead on what to do while your transformation project is slowing down. And the second session in 1 hour from now will be lessons from ERP failures, which I will be helping Marcus Harris from Taft Law present. And the third session we'll have 2 hours from now will be how technology is creating opportunity during crisis. So that will be a great session that I'm really looking forward to, because we'll really unpack how technology can be used strategically to address some of the challenges that organizations are facing, not just in general, but particularly here today. So really excited to have that session here today. A couple other things to note too, just in the agenda throughout the week. I wanted to highlight a few of the things that will be coming up later in the week here. Tomorrow we have sessions on organizational change management. So those of you that are interested in the human component of change management and employee adoption and things of that nature, that'll be really important for tomorrow. We also have a session on cleanse and protect, why data and cybersecurity are more important than ever. And that'll be led by Daryl Crockett, who's an outstanding speaker. If you haven't heard her speak before, she's very good. She's presenting tomorrow on a really important topic for today. Always an important topic, but especially today where the world is. And then on Thursday, we have sessions on supply chain management, workforce management, and then also a really interesting session for those of you that are concerned about your careers. We have a session on dodging career peril in light of today's economic situation. That'll be a panel discussion on Thursday where we talk more about career development and how to sharpen the tools and how to navigate what is likely to be an uncertain career path and job market for a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals. So that'll be especially interesting for those of you that are thinking more about your personal career management. That'll be on Thursday afternoon. And then Friday's last two sessions, you could argue, are arguably the most important, simply because they're kind of a capstone to the whole week. The two sessions are on transformation risk and how to mitigate risk. And then the third, the final session is one that I'll be leading on what does the future hold for digital transformation, and how does COVID-19 and the world we're living in now, how do we think that'll be affected, or how do we think that will affect our digital transformations going forward? So I just want to highlight a few of the things that are coming up throughout the week. Hopefully you can all make it, and certainly if you have colleagues that haven't registered yet, there's plenty of time to register and jump in on some of these sessions here throughout the week. So as we jump into the agenda here today, or into the topic, one other thing I want to share. I shared this one of these things yesterday. One of them is new that I didn't verbalize in the conference. The first thing is third stage on demand. If you like this sort of content, you like this sort of remote interaction, these sort of interactive workshop types of sessions, you'll love third stage on demand. It's a service we've launched here just this week. And we're trying to get our initial group of subscribers to the on-demand service. It's something that includes recorded training materials, live workshops, and also live one-on-one consulting sessions specific to your project, depending on which package you subscribe to. So we're very good at putting out content like this that you're seeing this week, but the difference with third stage on demand is it's premium exclusive content. There's stuff on there that's only for subscribers. So I'm going to actually send a link to subscribe to that while we're talking here today, and throughout the discussion, I'll send you a chat link just so everyone has it, and I'll also follow up with an email. I'll also send you a link to the second box that you see on your right here, which is a survey that we're doing in conjunction with our partners at Raven Intel, just trying to get some input from you all and from the market on what is happening with your digital transformation as it relates to COVID-19 and the current health and economic situation that we're in. I know I had a poll yesterday. I'll have another couple polls here that we'll put up today that'll be more kind of a pulse check-in on where things stand. But those are the this will be a little bit more in depth. That'll be super helpful for us. So so that is the overview. I'll send you a link to that survey as well. I also sent a link to that email in this morning's reminder email too, if you hadn't seen that. So that is kind of setting the stage for today. And today's session, to get started, is what to do while your transformation project is slowing down. And we have a number of co-hosts that'll be joining us here as well to discuss this topic. And we have some slides to kind of lead the discussion. But to start the conversation, we'll get going here with some of the initial content we have here. So as we get started here, I guess one thing I'd love to hear, and I'm gonna try this again, the whole polling function, see if I can do it a little bit better than yesterday. Love to hear what some of the things are that you think your transformation can most benefit from during the current health and economic situation. Now, I know and recognize there's a lot of worries that people have in the world, and there's things that we're concerned about on a personal level. We're certainly worried about our family's health, our own health, our employee and team members' health. We might be worried about the economy. There's a lot to worry about. And so I want to do is maybe set that aside for a moment and think about, as it relates to your current transformation, what are some of the things that you think that, given where we are in the world today, that you think your project could benefit from in the current environment? So some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today is, first of all, is realigning our overall strategy to meet today's realities. And I don't know if it's cutting off on your screen too, but that sentence is incomplete on my poll. But that's the first option. Better focus on business process improvement. Could this be an opportunity to improve our processes? More investment in organizational change management. That should say the third option if you don't see the full response. So more investment in organizational change management is the third option. Better technologies of software applications, cleaning up our data, enhancing our cybersecurity, realigning our overall project cost and risk. And I believe there's none of the above option as well. So I'll give you a second here to respond to that. I'll be curious to hear some of your feedback on what you think, given where you are with your project, where you think where you think you guys stand. And looks like a little over half of you have responded, and they're still coming in. So I'll let it sit here for a second. But as you're finishing up your responses here, these are a lot of the topics we're going to talk about today, and some of the ideas we have around, regardless of where you are and how you're impacted by COVID-19 and the current situation. These are some of the things that we'll cover in terms of how your project could potentially use this as an opportunity to readdress or address for the first time some of these things that you see listed here in front of you. And these will all be topics that we cover here throughout the day. So it looks like most of you have responded. So I'll end the poll here and show the results. Looks like the top response was more of a focus on organizational change, or I'm sorry, better focus on business process improvement. I just revealed my bias there by suggesting organizational change and seeing that on the next line there. Better focus on business process improvement is the #1 response, realigning our overall strategy to meet today's reality. That's something we talked a little bit about yesterday. We'll continue to talk about here in today's session and throughout the week. And that's really, really important. And I'm sorry, I wasn't sharing the results. Someone just informed me. So here, hopefully you can see them now. Let me know if you don't see the results now. But you should see those in front of you. Better focus on process improvement, like I said, was #1 at 57%, followed closely by realigning our strategy to meet today's realities. Looks like there's a cluster of maybe three that are kind of clustered together there. More investment in change management, better technology, certainly cleaning up our data. That's a big one. And Daryl, who will be speaking on that topic, I'm sure is thrilled to see that data rated so high there. And then realigning our overall project cost and risk. So this is all stuff we'll talk about. I think 3% said none of the above. So if you do have any comments on maybe something that you are thinking about that it's top of mind for you but was not included in one of those categories, I'd love to hear your thoughts there. Or even if you did respond to one or more of these categories as things that you're thinking about, then I'd love to hear additional things you're thinking about too. Feel free to chat the comments here, by the way. I'm the only one that will see them. Myself and the speakers are the only ones that see them. In fact, I'm not even sure if the rest of the speakers can see them, to be honest, but at the very least, I'll see them. And you can do that in the chat function here. So one thing that went really well yesterday, by the way, just as a logistical thing, is the level of engagement was so high yesterday. We had such great feedback and questions and that sort of thing. So I'd love to have any questions or comments along the way. In fact, I'll just go ahead and share one of the first comments is that someone says that they like my bias. Let's get these companies embracing change management. So thank you for that. I'm glad I'm not alone in having a bias towards change management. So today's topic is what to do while our transformation project is slowing down. These are some of the things that companies are thinking about and doing here in today's day and age, and to prepare for the world that we're living in right now. If you weren't on yesterday's session, I know some of you may not have been on yesterday's session. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their transformations, and we're completely technology agnostic, as are the other speakers in these sessions. The reason I share that is because as we talk about how to navigate this COVID-19 world and whatever it lays in front of us in 2020 and beyond, it may or may not involve technology. So the reason I say that is because we're not here to push any sort of technology or to suggest that, you all should go implement ERP right now because it's going to help you with the next pandemic or it's going to help you navigate the economy. That could be true for some of you, but for some of you, you may find that there's non-technology solutions and other creative ways to navigate where we're at today, because as we saw in yesterday's poll results, there's kind of a mix of people and a mix of different situations. Some are moving ahead as planned. Some have paused or slowed down their projects. Others are so busy that they can't really keep up or they're falling behind with their projects. So a lot of you are in different places. And so we want to provide some ideas that'll help you think about all your different options, regardless of where you are in the journey and where you are in the process here. So that agnostic view is an important part of who I am, and more importantly, who our team at Third Stage is. We're technology agnostic consulting consultants that help clients through those types of tough decisions. So when we look at today, where we're at today, obviously there's a lot we're thinking about with, like I said, health. We're worried about our kids, with homeschooling for a lot of us, or we're worried about their health, our health. We may have older parents who we're worried about. There's a lot of stuff we're worried about. But if we kind of back up and just look at our professional lives and what we're dealing with on these digital transformation projects, we realize that we may have scaled back our project for some of you, and some of you may have not scaled back, or maybe you're uncertain if it's going to be scaled back, or maybe you're certain it won't be. Either way, what we talk about here today is going to be very relevant to all of you, because we're going to talk about just how to navigate this reality, this new normal in general. So if we have scaled back or paused our project, or we're being impacted in some way, which I think we can agree we all are being impacted, what do we do now? How do we navigate this? And some of the questions to ask and things to think about, and this is reflected in the poll results we just went over, is do we have a clear vision that's aligned with today's realities? We find that there's a lot of companies out there, a lot of clients we're working with that had been heading down one path that was assuming or had a set of assumptions that were very valid maybe in 2019, and 2020 hits, and now suddenly our assumptions need to change. So it's important that we don't continue heading down that wrong path. We need to kind of redirect or pivot where we're headed. So that's a common challenge we're seeing right now. We were already seeing, and we're seeing it even more now, companies that were spending too much time and money and effort and too many resources on their transformations. We're going to talk a lot about this in our next session here in about 45 minutes on lessons from failures and lawsuits. But now is a really risky time for a lot of organizations, because those that were already spending too much, or they didn't really have their projects under control to begin with, now you get hit with COVID-19 and everything that goes along with that. It's really going to expose those vulnerabilities. And for others, now's a chance to really redirect and realign our project and make sure that we're basically in control of the project, and that we don't let this world situation cause us to lose control of our transformation or just get totally misaligned with the way it should be. We also have to think beyond where we are today, which is really hard to do, I think, for most of us, because we don't really know what's going to happen day to day, week to week, month to month, let alone what's the world going to look like a year from now. But to the extent that we can understand and anticipate what we think is going to happen, at the very least with our customer base or with our product mix or the types of services or products that our customers and stakeholders might be wanting, we want to make sure that we have realistic expectations along that. And then the final point here is, how do health and economic concerns change our approach? Does it change our approach? Are there things we should be thinking differently about or reprioritizing based on where we are today? Yesterday, I mentioned the example of more companies seeming to be more concerned and focused on the HR and HCM function in general. How do we rewire or redesign our HR departments and our HCM capabilities to be able to support health and other employee concerns that we think could be more of a consistent challenge for organizations. So those are just some of the things and common challenges that we're seeing in this current landscape. And I'd love to hear anything that you're thinking about or concerned about. And actually, we've already gotten a few comments. I'm just going to jump in and read some of these, because like I said earlier in the opening, this is a great opportunity for me and the other speakers and everyone on this conversation in these sessions to learn from one another. And I'm learning as much as you guys are in terms of what the pulse of the world is right now and the pulse of some of these project teams. So, here's a few comments I'll just kind of read through, and I think a couple of questions too. One is that, and this is where I would love to hear the feedback from our speaker panel, which, by the way, before I get to the questions, I made a logistical error in failing to introduce some of the new speakers to the session. And in fact, I need to do something here. Bear with me. There's a couple new speakers that you may not have met yesterday, or maybe you weren't, you may not recall. Like I said, my name's Eric Kimberling. We also have with us in the panel discussion here, Sean Lyons. He's from Rena Partners, a very close company that we work very closely with that does a lot of private equity type of consulting. I'll let him talk a little bit about what he does throughout the sessions. Mike Graham, who, if you were on yesterday, he CEO of Epilogue Systems. Daryl Crockett, who, if you were on yesterday, she's the data guru from Validatum. And then Bonnie Tinder is the CEO of Raven Intel. Raven Intel is the one that I mentioned a few minutes ago. It has the survey that we're going to be sending out a link to throughout the conversation here. So those are some of the people that I'll ask maybe here in a second to help me maybe take on some of these questions from the audience. But the first thing here is that first comment is someone that mentioned that taking this time to re-engage executive sponsors and tighten up alignment, address their concerns regarding, are these really the most important things for us to be focusing on during this? And he had that in quotes. So great point. It sounds like, that's some feedback on what this team or this individual is struggling with or looking to do in this new environment, is to re-engage with executive sponsors. And I think that's a critical point, because it's easy for us to have our own idea of what we think the world should look like or what our project should look like. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure it's aligned with what the executives are thinking, and executives are probably pivoting more than we may know. So how do we keep our transformation projects aligned with that? Another comment here is company focus was changed to take advantage of new, different business opportunities. An open mind to opportunities is imperative today. It's a great point, and I think we'll talk about this in the supply chain session. I think that's tomorrow. I'm sorry, that's on Thursday. We talk about supply chains more, but we'll talk a bit about how companies are adjusting their supply chains to adjust. But there's also just strategic revenue growth type opportunities as well. And maybe I'll, at this point, maybe just open up to the panel here. Anyone that wants to chime in, any thoughts or comments on what we've talked about so far? Okay, hopefully you guys are able to unmute. Just message me if you're having any technical issues because yesterday you guys were able to jump in. It looks like easier than you are now. So I'll keep going, but chat me if you're not able to chime in. Here's a question that they'll ask in Mike Graham. If you are able to unmute, you might have some thoughts on this one as well. It's related to organizational assessments and the people side of change. But how do you do organizational assessments and change impact assessments with a very lean organization? We hope to pick our vendor in late 2020, so we have time to get ready, but we're facing challenges with getting the teams involved. Any advice? Would an external consultant help?
There you go. Sure, Eric. Hi, Mike Graham with Epilogue Systems. The problem for me, Eric, with unmuting was I was having a hard time finding that control bar. So I think I figured it out.
Okay.
So we're involved in an aspect of digital transformation that has to do with the effective adoption of applications amongst the users. But one of the aspects that we get involved with is identifying skill sets in the organization that can facilitate that adoption, who can be a part of their subject matter experts, who can easily participate in the assembly of the knowledge that result in effective adoption. So that's one of the hardest parts that is being affected right now amongst our client base, is that there are, unfortunately, furloughs going on. There are actual outright layoffs going on. And so we have a lot of role changes underway, and that is creating a lot of disruption in team composition and in understanding who can step up and take over what role. So that's one of the things that is immediately now affecting in-flight, projects and projects that we're planning on getting in flight is how do we identify who is now the team, and is that the team that is going to be effective going forward?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, part of the question too is, how do you do organizational impact assessments with a lean organization and getting teams involved? And actually, we were just talking to a client yesterday about this after yesterday's Stratosphere sessions. And, one of the things we're doing is, first of all, a key part of our organizational assessment are online anonymous surveys. So in some ways that doesn't really change, the way we would handle call it the anonymous quantitative data gathering. But the harder part are the focus groups. We like to do focus groups to get a feel for the qualitative aspects of a culture and some of the organizational pitfalls that an organization might face. And we're doing more of that via Zoom and that sort of thing. And it's not easy, but it's certainly something that can be done, especially when you have everyone on video. You can see their faces. You build a certain amount of trust. A little more challenging, but it can definitely still be done. So I think the organizational assessment piece of it, to answer the question of how do you do that, we'll talk more about that when we get into the change management session tomorrow. That'll be the first session tomorrow. But just in a nutshell or high level, there's two prongs to it. There's the online assessment, the anonymous surveys, it's quantitative, and then the qualitative focus groups that we guide through with different people. And then part of the question that I'll preface with the fact that I'm completely biased in answering this question, but would an external consultant help? Yes, absolutely. I think they would, because I am an external consultant and I would benefit from that. So that just to be 100% transparent in the one bias I do have, in addition to the fact that I'm biased towards change management. That's the other one. And then another comment here is taking pause and then realigning strategies with business processes is what an enterprise must focus on. So kind of consistent with what we saw in the data or in the poll responses, it's realignment of strategies, focus on processes. I think those are the two top ones. And you do those two things, I think that kind of sets the tone or the foundation for a lot of the follow-up execution or redirection or pivoting that might happen from there. So one of the common things we see with organizations is that they run into a lot of different problems when they rush through projects. You see a lot of times companies will make a decision about a new technology tool, and they'll decide that, hey, we're excited, we've got a lot of momentum, the team's on board, executives on board, they've approved a budget, all this stuff, and we just sort of jump right in and just start doing stuff. And what we're finding now is a lot of companies that had done that and they had kind of started building a transformation on a weak foundation or a sort of a house of cards because they didn't really have their ducks in a row. They didn't have alignment. They didn't have clear business processes. They didn't have their data figured out. A lot of stuff they didn't do. And then they started to build on that and they start to figure out that the foundation's pretty shaky. The good news, if they're, trying to be looking at the bright side of things today, is that for some of us, it's an opportunity to step back and look at, okay, where did we mess up that foundation and how could we maybe go back and fix some of that, especially if we're in a position where we've been told to slow things down or, things are so uncertain that we can't keep investing at the same rate that we have been in this project, or maybe we've been told to completely stop the project, or maybe we're uncertain. I think there was about, yesterday, there was 26% of you that said that you were uncertain how your project would be impacted, which is a very telling number. I mean, that's a pretty high number of you that you just don't know yet. Granted, it's only been, a few weeks, maybe a couple months since this really started to unfold, this whole situation, but that's still a fairly high number. So when there is that sort of uncertainty or doubt or things are slowing down, whatever the case may be, it's a great opportunity now to look at what is it that we can do to avoid some of these problems that so many companies run into when things are good. When the economy is good and when companies have money and they decide they're going to invest a lot of money in a big project. I mean, in some ways that's a good thing, but there's a dark side of that where companies make a lot of bad decisions and the money and the abundant resources kind of masks some of those problems. And I think what we see now is some of these problems are being exposed. And the good news, though, is it creates an opportunity for us to either fix those things, or if we're about to embark on a transformation sometime this year, in the near future, later this year, we can really focus on how can we make sure we avoid these problems of not having enough, operational direction or clarity on how our processes should look going forward, or we're making sure we're not just handing the keys over to the system integrator and assuming they're just going to figure things out and take care of it all for us, or spinning our wheels making decisions while the consultants are charging by the hour. We're sitting there trying to figure out what we want to be when we grow up. You've got a big team of consultants over here that are just waiting for you to decide what you want, and you're paying for that time. There's also the point of technology driving the business rather than the business driving the technology. Today's ERP systems are generally so flexible that it's a pitfall to fall into when you assume that the system's just going to dictate to you or tell you how to run your business, as well as some of the other failure points you see on the bottom line here. Too much time and money spent on a project. Team gets frustrated. It's a lot to absorb. Lack of ownership at my end. These are all problems that some of you may have been experiencing. I'd love to hear your comments if you have experienced any of these things with your current project, or if there's things you're trying to address with your current project. But we see that now is a good time to step back and figure out how can we either avoid these problems or mitigate these problems that have already started to materialize in our projects. Any thoughts from the other speakers? Anything that resonates with you guys, or things that you would add to this?
Yeah, Eric, I wanted to talk a little bit about the speed. Obviously, a company doesn't want to invest too much time and too much money on a project, very clear. But I'm seeing another trend in the market, and especially when you're looking at a cloud migration, there's a lot of incentive for the system integrators and the software company themselves to accelerate your project beyond what might be reasonably healthy. Okay, so that push to get things done as quickly as possible might seem like an attractive thing on the surface, but may actually end up being a very bad problem for the project, where you're not getting enough time to, as you know, put your data in, clean your data, or do your testing, and really to thoroughly think through all the implications and all the integrations and configurations that are necessary to implement the system. So I think that's a problem. In fact, I'd say to you that the system integrator and the people that sold you the software, that company is incentivized to push you as fast as they can in many cases. And I think there's going to be a lot of make up for lost time trying to get the revenue in to make up for the delays that we're experiencing right now due to COVID.
Yeah. Another thing, Daryl, tied into that is we're hearing a lot about companies now have bandwidth and availability But what we're seeing is sometimes people who haven't done this before, maybe they're not qualified, they're certainly not trained on it, are pushed into an ERP implementation, for example, and said, let's get this done in the next few months. We've got all of us available. Let's just do it. They're decreasing the dependence on consultants and outside help, just assuming that with extra people, they can just do it all themselves in a controlled amount of time. And that ties in with what you're saying. That's a very big mistake, because mistakes are made. You put the wrong requirements in, it extends on budget, timeline, and risk.
And, you know, people that are thinking of doing that, businesses that are thinking of doing that, of engaging more and using more of their employees in that, I mean, that's not a bad idea. If you're going to do that, but get some outside support, get coaching, get leadership to at least assist your team in making sure that you're doing the right things in the right way. Because if you're just going to expect all of a sudden people that are naturally available to you just because their regular jobs might be less intense right now, doesn't automatically overnight give them all the wisdom, training, and experience of decades of project implementation the way you would for the team that you might have tapped prior to COVID and this new kind of approach. So get help.
And I'll tell you, one of the of these that really resonates with me is this decisions being made while the meter is running on expensive consultants. And at Raven, we review completed projects, so postmortem, and that comes up all the time where a project is delayed, which requires extra consulting time. Because a process decision sat in the inbox of an executive who was on vacation, or just didn't see, that particular project as being a priority. And I think, in the new world, nobody's taking vacation anymore, so that's not necessarily an excuse for a executive not being able to focus on it, but that is a common one we hear. And I think, in the current climate, that's probably less so because people are not traveling as much and things like that. So, I think it presents an opportunity there.
And I would add, we talked earlier about, taking the time to reassess alignment with organizational priorities. I mean, digital transformations are long in timelines anyway, and we often have turnover at the leadership level, which can affect alignment. But we have a situation now, as has already been pointed out, where there are businesses that are looking whether they're going to align in certain sectors, certain product lines, et cetera, that can do better in the current environment. Does the digital transformation priorities align with that new direction? And one of the things I would also say is, in order to avoid that timeline, accelerate, or rather have the consultants clock running at a hyperspeed as we wait. Yesterday, there was a session that had to do with renegotiating contracts. And I think that you have to, really impress upon your vendors that they have to find a new level of flexibility that may not have been provided for in the contract. In fact, right before this call, I was on with one of my people with a very, very large opportunity for us, many, many thousands of users, and we had to adjust our expectation to align with the fact that they are doing just what I described. So I think flexibility amongst your vendors is something that you have to have very discreet conversations about, and soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if there's uncertainty, and you don't know what's going to happen, it's still an opportunity to say, okay, well, let's get ahead of this, and let's not wait for us to be told that, hey, we're slamming the brakes, or we're canceling the whole thing. You don't want to assume the worst, but you also want to prepare and have options in mind and be ahead of it to where you can be part of the solution. And where we see a lot of companies that talking about change management and buy-in or lack thereof, a lot of project teams, this just sort of happens to, you're told that, no, we're stopping, or we're slowing down, and you kind of get that mandate from the top, and it still may happen. But if you can get ahead of it and say, well, here's some options, it's not all or nothing. We don't have to be at this high burn rate. We don't have to be at zero, but we could be somewhere in between. And what are some of those ways that we could, find a good compromise there? Oops. A few other things to think about, and this is where, Sean from Marina, if you're able to join in here, I think I've made you a co-host, so you should be able to unmute. Sean, what are some of your thoughts on, depending on what phase you are in the project? I know you had some thoughts here on, how this can, you tackle it differently depending on where you are in the project, which is a really good point, because there's things you can do differently if you're about to start a project versus if you're about to go live. What are the things you should be thinking about or considering as you go through this year?
Yeah, I think the feedback from the polling that you did, the first two gates I think that you want to be able to pass are, okay, is there anything fundamentally different about our strategy in general, and then with particular initiatives that we might be undertaking? If the answer is no, then it's okay, where are we in the stage of this initiative? Because there was a reason why you undertook the initiative in the first place. And so if you're still in the planning and design stage, well, it gives you some more runway, likely more capacity to make sure that you get thoroughly vetted requirements. A lot of the topics thus far, or conversation thus far, has also been about alignment and re-engaging with sponsors. This can all be done still effectively with remote collaboration tools, I think, and with minimal cash outlay. If you've got the internal resources now with capacity to do so. If you're in the execution phase, gives you an opportunity to button up some of the documentation or training materials, checklists, issues lists that may have fallen by the wayside over the course of the execution. If you're on the precipice of going live, it gives you an opportunity for a soft launch, for piloting certain aspects. I think that the underlying emphasis here is that, unless you've been strategically disrupted in some way by the situation, I think that the key is to have the discipline and focus to continue with the initiative that you undertook, because there was a reason for it, and use the opportunity to shore up where you may have had shortcomings.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And, a lot, you kind of, as you were explaining that, Sean, I was thinking back to something Daryl said around, the system integrator pushing and saying, hey, no, stay the course, keep doing what you're doing. And, and someone asked why, by the way, Daryl, one of the questions was, which I think you did answer after the person typed this, but someone said, why are system integrators pushing? And this is a really important time to think about, where are all of our interests aligned? Where are all of our bias? And system integrators right now are hurting because their business model in many ways is being completely disrupted, because their business model isn't built for this sort of remote consulting and whatnot. Their business model is based on getting people boots on the ground and, billing as much time as they can. So when a company says, hey, hold on, we're going to take a time out and try and figure out what direction we should be going, that hurts them. So there's going to be sort of an incentive to say, well, let's just keep going. Let's just stay the course. Our product, SAP, Oracle, whatever it is, will help you navigate some of these challenges. But you really have to look at, why did we undertake this project in the first place, and how has that changed? And let's make sure that the whole project is aligned with that. Maybe nothing changes and you keep doing what you're doing, but it's highly likely that you're going to need to do something different to adjust your project for this new reality. Even if you're not going to slow down, you still need to make sure you're not going too fast toward the wrong goal. But these are some great ideas on, depending on where you are in the project at different phases, some ways that you can take advantage of that downtime in a low cost way too, by the way. A lot of this stuff isn't super focused on investing in new technology or buying more software licenses or making big long-term commitments on a cloud contract or whatever. These are things that most, you should have been doing anyway, and B, it's pretty low cost, low risk. So that's what we're trying to convey here today, or share, or some ideas on how to really take advantage of the situation and tighten up your project.
Maybe, Eric, maybe big things are changing too. Maybe you are rethinking the depth and breadth of this project, not so much for delaying or spreading it out, but maybe just generally. It might be that if your particular project was focused primarily on a technology acquisition and implementation, and really hadn't looked at the underlying problems that led up to that, because you didn't have time or it just didn't happen the right way. Now, all of a sudden, there's this big money problem or pause or time issue or resource issue that causes you to rethink the thing, it could be a pretty big change. It could be, a change. Do we really need to do this? Are there other ways to do this? And I would be, not a good consultant if I didn't say, I think you need to put all those things on the table and just run through them. Most of the time, your reasoning was sound and the reason that you're doing this continues on. But don't overlook the fact that you have a great opportunity to kind of shake things up and really look at things. And you should take a day or two or a week or so to think about that if you can spare that time.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, we have a few questions here, and I'm actually going to I'm going to flash up a slide while I'm going through these questions here. This is kind of a framework type slide of things that we typically recommend to clients that they do prior to really going full speed ahead with the project. And this is some of that foundational stuff we were talking about before. What are some of those foundational things that even if you're getting close to go live, or even if you're in the middle of design or testing or whatever, what are some things we can go back and say, okay, let's tighten up the foundation. Let's get some of these prerequisites in place. And if we're about to start a project or early in a project, these are absolutely some even more important ways to get started. So I'm going to leave this up here and just let you digest that while we dig in a few questions here. And some of these are just more general comments. One comment here is many times the full-time employee doesn't think they know enough about the solution to participate fully. Education of internal resources is important. And Mike, I think you'd probably agree even more so now, right? And as far as given the uncertainty and the fear that a lot of people have, learning and education for those people is even more important, wouldn't you say?
Well, you just hit upon my bias. Obviously, my company is about digital adoption, and I never think that there's enough documentation, and there's never enough time for documentation. But this could be a time, and I think Sean actually made that statement. This could be a time to look at what documentation it does not exist, because you can't have learning without documentation. And then I think you need to take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another comment here is a big barrier has been the capacity of leaders and employees' mind space to absorb the change. They come to the meetings and trainings, but simply cannot track and absorb the information they need to support and move forward. And that's a great point, because that's a dynamic you see all the time. You see it all the time with clients, but even more so now. It's like there's so much on our minds, and you think about just when a lot of us are working from home today and have been for days or weeks or however long, and you think about all the stuff you're worried about when you're at home. Your kids, your health, and the news and all that stuff. And it's just a lot. It's just information overload, and then you go deal with work, and then you're dealing with this big transformation, and we find that our employees' heads are full. It's just a lot to absorb. In fact, when we were preparing for this conference, we were trying to be really mindful of that, and we actually scaled back the volume of content and the volume of slides and things of that nature than we would normally do in an in-person event, because we felt like we would completely flood people's heads with stuff they just couldn't absorb. So we tried to simplify it a bit, and I'd be curious to hear your feedback after the fact if we succeeded or not. But that's one thing that we're all seeing, is that the employees are having enough trouble as it is staying on top of some of these changes. Program fatigue on major change management programs where there are different work streams, et cetera, especially related to regulatory issues. And that's a great point too, that a lot of companies, whether it's a food and beverage type company that's used to regulation, or just a manufacturing plant that maybe hasn't been historically super highly regulated, now you're going to become more regulated just because you have employees and people that could be spreading pandemics. So now you've got that change to address as well. And that gets back to the HCM and HR side of things, and how that's becoming such a priority. Here's a question I'll ask to whoever wants to answer it on the panel. Does the scope change COVID-19 imply shifts the companies that are early in their digital transformation journey away from Agile and more towards waterfall? Let me try rephrasing that. Does the scope change COVID-19 implies shift companies that are early in their transformation away from Agile more towards waterfall? So I think what they're asking is this going to create more of the pendulum swinging towards waterfall and more planning and more kind of structure, or, will Agile continue to thrive? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
I'm not a big Agile fan, for sure.
Yeah.
Unless it's a very small part of the overall project, but Agile does not work very well with data at all. Waterfall is the preferred method, or a kind of even a hybrid would be okay for certain parts of the project to be that. But I wouldn't recommend anybody using Agile right now unless it's a very small part of the overall implementation. So switching to SDLC, fine with me. Recommend that, but it has to be tightly managed. If you're going to do anything, I would shift to critical path, critical chain as a methodology change, more than a pendulum swing. Stay in SDLC, but work more. If you're looking to accelerate your project, go to a critical chain. That can save you a ton of time and really help you focus and make the best use of resources on your project.
One thing, I totally agree with what you just said, Daryl. One thing I would add that might help the audience clarify that, though, is I think the word Agile is so broad and misused in a lot of ways. I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and I agree with it, that Agile definitely has a dark side. It's typically not as great as people think it is, unless you're a software developer or if you're a system integrator trying to get your foot in the door with a real small piece of work, using Agile as a guise to get in the door. But that's different. The waterfall approach to a transformation is different than building Agile capabilities within your organization. So you want to remain Agile or become Agile as an organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want an Agile approach to your transformation. Would you agree with that, Daryl? Or because
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of supply chain.
I thought the question was about project methodology.
It was, but I'm just trying to clarify for the audience, because I think a lot of times people will say, well, but we need to be more Agile because you even said to ourselves that supply chains are changing and, that sort of thing. So I think that's where I just want to clarify that for the audience that you're answering the question, but there's another layer of it that you don't want to get confused with on that. Any other thoughts on Agile? Because I know it's almost like a politically charged question or topic. It's like asking.
Yeah, in the last week, I had a conversation with the managing director at one of the big four SIs. And of course, that's a whole different world. And that SI is a proponent of Agile. So I think they were going to defend it regardless. But they felt that Agile was still relevant in this environment because it breaks it down into smaller chunks. And sometimes you still want to proceed with that smaller chunk rather than hold back for the big bang.
Yeah, and I think you can do that, and that's the other thing too, is you can take bite-sized chunks, but as long as you're doing it towards a bigger picture, blueprint, and vision for what you're trying to accomplish. I think a lot of times people use Agile as an excuse to not have a vision for what the overall project's going to look like, or it's an excuse to try to sell a customer something that says, well, don't worry about your whole transformation. Let's just focus on financials or HCM, which maybe is okay for you, but if you're looking at this as a bigger transformation, you want to make sure you have a clear blueprint there. We're getting a lot of comments on this already, so I'll run through a few of these here in these last few minutes we have. Just a couple comments on Agile from the audience here. Delivery of little and often, Agile sometimes helps the budgetary holder to see progress. So that is one of the benefits of Agile, is you get those early wins, you get early momentum, but longer term, sometimes what happens is it's, I don't want to say it's aimless, but it's not in the context of the bigger picture. And I know I'm totally generalizing, that's not always true, but we see that a lot with companies that are allegedly Agile that are kind of all over the place with what they're rolling out. Let's see, trick with Agile in ERP is to have specific capability or outcome in mind. Don't try Agile if you can't define a specific capability. You must always keep sight of the end game for the ERP holistic solution, which I totally agree with. That's a well put way that says it better than I could have said it. And then I'm going to go back to this earlier slide, Daryl, because you asked me to, on the data piece. Is this the slide you were talking about?
No, one more back.
This one? Oh, yeah.
I hadn't touched on those bottom two bullets, so just want to make sure we give the opportunity to do that.
Why don't
But
you do those?
I didn't want to make it all about data. I'm willing to.
Well, that's a good way to close it out and lead and plant the seed and the interest in your session coming up. So do you want to maybe take that and you
Yeah,
can?
yeah, sure. I always want to take every opportunity I can to raise people's awareness about data. Data is one of the most underappreciated, underplanned aspects of your project. I think the people that voted at least at number 3 as an item are really already on top of that and experiencing that. You should be nervous about your data. You should be concerned, and it's very difficult to overplan for data. That's for sure. I wanted to bring up that as we talked about the system integrators and their involvement, they're probably not budgeting the time and the activities and the resource planning for getting your data ready. When they talk about data migration, they're saying, we'll migrate your data if you put it in this template. Or maybe we'll attach to the data in your legacy system and we'll lift and shift that over to the new system. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. Both of those two things are problems for you as business interested parties and consultants certainly that are working on the project. The system integrator typically contractually makes data your responsibility unless it's a large project and they're mature and they've already had a team for that. But the other aspect of it is that they're going to migrate the data that you put into the format that they want. But getting it into that format, deduping, consolidating all of your data across all your ERP systems or multiple systems, getting one source of truth to put into that template in the way that you need to, that's the trick. And now is the best time to be doing that. Think about all the people that are working at home and maybe they only have, a half an hour here, an hour there, or maybe their work is a little bit slower and you're trying to keep them active and working. Well, that's what you want to have them do. Have that work chunked up and start working on cleaning your master data within your existing systems with some parameters. So it's a great time to do that. You can measure it, you can monitor it, keeps people busy. On to the topic of data security. That is a very big challenge for everybody. We're going to talk a lot more about that tomorrow in our session. But the overall concept of is if you're going through an ERP implementation anyway, and you're opening up those databases and looking at them so that you can extract the data out and clean it, that's a great time to be working on your mapping of where your private protected data is, and also generally, where is your data? Where are your assets? Where did they reside throughout the organization? We don't want to waste this great opportunity for a little bit of a slower pace for some of you to get planning, get structured, get a plan in place for cleansing it and mapping that data, not only for the project, but also for future and kind of more immediate data security needs. So, getting help with that and having a plan in place is one of my favorite topics for sure.
Yeah. And you'll have a whole session on that tomorrow afternoon. That'll be the third session tomorrow. So appreciate that. Well, I'll be honest, this is a topic I feel like we could have spent easily another hour on. So what I would encourage the audience to do is if this is something that resonates with you, if you want to chat more about it, reach out and we can schedule some time to talk more about your specific project or bounce around ideas on how you might adjust your project in the face of new reality. Hopefully this gave you some initial topics to think about, our initial considerations. We've got about 5 minutes until our next session, which is on lessons from ERP failures and lawsuits, which, what does that mean to today's world? How can we navigate that a little bit more effectively? That's going to be with Marcus Harris, who you may have met yesterday, and myself. And we'll be back here on the same line here in about 5 minutes. You're going to see your screen go blank. I'm going to go blank for about 5 minutes, and we'll be back here to get started. So we'll see you all in a few minutes.